Welcome to the Money Management Strategies module on saving on spending. This is one in a series of educational modules that have been created for you by the University of San Francisco School of Law to help you get on target to succeed financially while in law school. It's very important that while in law school, because you're likely borrowing money to help pay for law school, that you make good financial choices. And clearly, how you're spending money will have a direct impact on how much you need to borrow. So it only makes sense that if you want to succeed in borrowing the minimum amount necessary to go to law school here at USF, you want to make sure you're very conscious of how you're spending money and think about ways you could actually save on what you're spending. And that's exactly what we're going to address and cover in this particular tutorial. There's another tutorial that you may also want to check out that talks about how to develop your spending plan and to build your budget. So I'd encourage you to take a look at that as well. But now, let's go ahead and get started on the topic of saving on spending. You know, while you're in law school, you need to manage your finances so that you succeed not only in getting your education, but in making sure that it hasn't cost you too much. So to manage your finances successfully, you need to develop an affordable budget. You need to control your expenses, and you need to track your spending. So in this particular module, we're going to be focusing on how can you control your expenses. What can you do to help you spend less, but also how can you then figure out how to track your spending and to make sure you're not spending too much. As I mentioned, there's another module in the series called Building Your Budget that helps you to develop an affordable budget plan. So how can you control your spending? Well, you've got to take charge of your spending. In other words, you've got to take control of how you're spending money. And one of the things you want to be mindful of is that what it's costing you to be here at the law school is a function of the tuition and fees you're paying, the amount you're spending on books and supplies, but also what you need to be spending on your living expenses. And the school actually calculates for you what they think it's going to cost for you to be enrolled during the academic year. It's what they refer to as cost of attendance. Sometimes it's also referred to as your student expense budget. I also like to call it the sticker price. And it is calculated every year by the financial aid staff, and it includes both the fixed tuition fees, the costs that you're paying directly to the university to be here at the law school, as well as allowances for your books and supplies and your living expenses for the months of the year in which you're actually enrolled in classes. But it is only for that period of time that you're actually in classes. So if you're a full-time student, then you're likely only enrolled 9 months of the year. If you're a part-time student, you may actually be enrolled 12 months. The point is, full-time students are only actually getting financial aid to cover their living expenses for the 9 months of the academic year, but they still live 12 months out of every year. So you want to be a bit mindful of that. Now, the reason I mentioned cost of attendance is because not only does it give you a guide as what you might need to spend and what it might cost you to be here at the law school, it also represents the maximum amount of financial aid you can receive from the school, whether it's scholarships and grants or the loans you're borrowing. But the total amount of financial aid you're receiving to help cover those expenses cannot exceed whatever the school has calculated as your cost of attendance. And cost of attendance is not intended to be prescriptive. In other words, it's not intended to represent what you are going to spend or what you even should be spending, but rather it's simply a guide to help you get a sense of what you might spend given what typical students are spending on their living expenses in particular to attend the law school here at the University of San Francisco. You also want to be mindful of the fact that in calculating your living expenses, the school did not ask you what you were going to be spending. They came up with what they considered to be a reasonable or an average amount. And then you have to sort of assess what are you actually going to need to spend and what are your expenses going to be. And there are going to be certain expenses you're incurring that they cannot and did not include when they did their calculations. For example, in terms of transportation, they cannot include the fact that you might have a car payment. The federal government does not allow them to give you financial aid to help you pay that car payment. They also can't include the idea that you might have credit card debt that you're having to pay each month. Again, the federal government does not allow them to include as a cost the fact that you might have credit card debt. So you want to be mindful of the fact that what you're actually spending to be here may be different and likely is different from what they have estimated, in part because you are making those choices. It's not choices that the school is making. So that's why it becomes so important that you want to figure out what are you spending on your living expenses. So that's why it becomes important to actually do some paperwork. Figure out how much are you spending on housing. Do you have a rent payment? Do you have a mortgage? What are the utilities you're paying for? Electric, phone, internet, cable. Maybe some of them are included in your rent, maybe not. You have insurance. If you have a car, you certainly likely have auto insurance. The university requires that you're covered under a health insurance plan, either that you've purchased through the university or that's provided some other way, perhaps through your parents. Maybe you've opted to get renter's insurance. You're obviously going to need food, so it's the groceries, the eating out. You may need home furnishings. You may need household supplies, so that's paper goods, it's cleaning products. Again, you have to be thinking about what are you spending on those things. Then there's transportation, getting to and from school each day, but also getting to and from the university at the beginning and the end of the academic year and during the holiday season between semesters. The point is, what are you going to be spending for those transportation costs? Do you have a car payment? If you do, you also have to pay gas, maintenance, and parking for the car. Instead, are you using public transit? Are you going to, again, what are you going to be spending on transportation? Clothing. Both the purchase of and the maintenance of that clothing, personal grooming, hair care, hygiene, cosmetics, etc. Entertainment, other miscellaneous expenses, prescriptions, pet care, and so forth. Again, you want to be mindful of how are you spending money? How do you need to be spending money while you're here at the law school? But remember that spending is about choices. So you want to think about your spending. Will you or are you sharing the cost of housing with one or more roommates, or are you living alone? If you're living by yourself, you are likely spending more than if you were sharing the cost of housing with someone else. And by sharing, we don't necessarily mean you're sharing a bedroom, but a 2-bedroom apartment is not twice as expensive as a studio or a 1-bedroom. Plus, when you have roommates, you're also sharing other costs like utilities. Perhaps you're sharing in some of the food costs. So again, sharing the cost of housing with someone else or other people can reduce the actual cost to you as an individual. Do you bring your food and beverages from home every day, or are you buying them here at school? If you're buying them here at school, you are likely spending more than if you're bringing them from home. Are you shopping for new clothes? Are you eating out in restaurants? Are you taking a break from your studies? For example, you're going to go see movies, go to sporting events, take a weekend to get away, etc. Clearly, you are likely going to be doing those things. But be mindful about how much you're spending on these things. That money could be saved for other expenses. You could be using that money, for example, to help pay for your living expenses during the summer when you're not in school, therefore you're not getting any financial aid for those summer living expenses. You want to consider what in economics we refer to as opportunity costs. Opportunity cost is all about trade-offs. It's recognizing that you have alternatives when you use your scarce resources. And of course, you know that when it comes to your time, but you also have alternatives when it comes to spending money. So you want to be asking yourself, as you're using that money and that time, how are you putting it to its highest and best use? Have you made the best use of it? Because if you haven't, then you've actually incurred an added cost. You've sacrificed because you've given up the opportunity to do something better with it. So as you're spending money, particularly on your living expenses, be mindful of the fact that not only is it likely increasing how much you may need to be borrowing in student loans, it also is impacting your ability to do other things financially, either at that point or in the future. So you want to make sure that while you're in law school, you're living like a student and that you're not living like a lawyer. So what are some ideas for thrifty living? Well, again, consider living with roommates. Rent a room rather than an apartment. Both are options here in the Bay Area. And, this year you may already be sort of locked into your housing situation. But if you're going to be here next year and beyond, again, look to making changes when it comes time to renew that lease. I realize that, your time is very valuable to you. And so you want to be very conscious of how you're spending your time. And so the idea of, making a lunch before you come to school each day, it may not be your idea of the best use of 10 to 15 minutes of your time. But if you can bring your own lunch, if you can bring your own coffee, beverages, and snacks, and so forth to school, then you're not going to have to buy them here at the school or leave school during the day to go get those food and refreshment needs that you have. Again, you want to be mindful of the fact that not only by bringing your food and beverages from home every day does it save you money, it also likely is saving you time. It's allowing you to stay focused on your studies, going to class, meeting with your fellow students, attending outside lectures, studying in the library, and so forth. So you can get all of your studies done more quickly, so you can also get home for a better night's sleep. Now, when it comes to eating out, you want to eat and drink at cheap places when having a night out. And you know, there's lots of places in San Francisco that can be very expensive. They're lots of fun, but they're expensive. But there's also a lot of options that aren't so expensive. And you know, the students who've already been here for a while are a good resource if you're not sure, because you're new to the area, where you might find the good deals. You want to dress for less. To the extent you're going to need to buy new clothes, make sure you're shopping at discount stores if you need to do so. And I recognize that if you haven't been living in the Bay Area, your wardrobe may not be quite adequate, particularly in terms of dealing with the climate that you're going to experience here in San Francisco. Or if for some reason you change size during the time you're in law school, you may need to sort of adjust your wardrobe accordingly. But most law students probably enter law school with the assortment of clothes that they're going to need, both in terms of casual and more formal attire, to get through law school successfully. So you want to make sure that you're not buying new clothes just to keep up with the fashion trends, because you can't really afford to keep up with fashion trends while you're in law school. That's not a way that you're living like a student. Now, you might want to consider joining a warehouse club, for example, Costco or Sam's Club, with a classmate, because typically at those places, you can buy a membership and then add another person to the membership so the two of you can share in the annual membership fee. And then you can buy things in bulk and then split them up so that you're also splitting the cost by sharing with others. That can be particularly useful with non-perishable items like paper goods. You know, I recognize you probably as an individual don't need 20 pounds of potatoes at one time. But if you're splitting them among 4 different people, then that can make sense. And typically, shopping at warehouse clubs like Costco and Sam's Club, although it's in bulk, you're getting more value for your dollar because you're getting it for every unit, you're getting it at a lower price. And at least Costco has stores here in San Francisco that you wouldn't necessarily have to be able to drive to. Shop with a list and buy only what's on that list. You know, when you go shopping, if you don't have a list, if you're not really focused, and if you haven't planned what you're going to buy, then it's very possible you'll make some impulse purchases. You'll buy things that you don't necessarily need. And as a result, you're going to spend more money than you had needed to and likely planned to. So if you want to be in control of your spending, you've got to make sure you've got that list. And then you stick to the list, unless as you're going through the store, you do recognize you forgot to put something on the list. And of course, to the extent you can clip and use coupons, that will save you money. But only if you're buying things you were going to buy anyway. You're not saving money if you end up buying something because you have a coupon, but you didn't really need the item. So again, be careful, because you want to be aware and careful of making impulse shopping and purchasing choices. You know, beware of impulse shopping and buying for convenience. I recognize that going to law school is a very time-intensive effort and activity. And so you want to be very efficient of how you're using time. But if you're buying a lot of prepared foods, that's buying for convenience, and they're typically more expensive and not necessarily quite as healthy. So you want to be making sure that you're not doing impulse shopping. You're buying things impulsively, things that, for example, aren't on your list, and that you're not buying a lot for convenience where you're likely spending more than you would have had to. You also want to distinguish between what you need and what you want. There's lots of things we want. There's a lot fewer things that we probably need. You know, in reality, being a law student requires primarily that you're getting plenty of time to study and plenty of time to sleep. Everything else is kind of a distraction. So you want to be careful about getting too distracted. And that can mean buying things that you don't need. So again, that's why shopping with a list becomes so important, because that allows you to sort of plan your shopping, to think about what is it you actually need, so that when you get to the store, you're not influenced by their desire to sell you more things, by attractive packaging, attractive displays, things being reduced. All of those are ways to get you to buy things that you may not actually need. So make sure that you are shopping with a list, so that you're more likely to be buying only what you need. And when it comes to having fun, try to make sure that, to the extent it can be free fun, as long as it's legal, then that's great. Law school is not that far from Golden Gate Park, where you have a lot of opportunity for recreational activity and other kinds of activities. So again, if you're not sure because you're new to law school or new to San Francisco, ask your fellow students. Where can you do things for free? Where can you actually get good deals on things? Because they've already been here for a while. They can provide very useful guidance there. What about other ideas? Well, again, ask for your fellow students about ideas for bargains. Where are they finding bargains? But also, remember, you are a member of a very exclusive club. You are a law student at the University of San Francisco, and that membership comes with a membership card, your student ID. And so when you are going out, don't hesitate to show your student ID to see, is that merchant, is that business willing to give you a discount because you're a student? Because if they are, then you're going to save money. You're going to spend less. And that's what it's all about. Meeting your needs, but also spending less. You have needs that you have to fulfill. We understand that. But you want to make sure that in fulfilling those needs, you're doing so by spending the least amount possible, by being thrifty, by being frugal. But you also need to track your spending, because if you don't track how you're spending money, you're going to bust that budget you created, that plan you put in place. So what should you do with your spending plan, the budget you may have created? And again, remember, there's another module in this series on how to build your budget, so I'd encourage you to check that one out. But what can you or should you do with your spending plan? Well, first of all, you want to follow the plan, because you've wasted your time if you created your budget but then don't stick to it. And that requires that you track your expenses to see if you are adhering to or following that plan. If not, make adjustments so that it's a realistic plan, and make sure the adjustments are still affordable in the long run. Because, for example, maybe when you developed your budget or your spending plan, you weren't exactly sure what you were going to be spending on your living expenses here at the law school, because you hadn't been in law school before and you hadn't been living in San Francisco. So it's reasonable to expect that you might not have accurately estimated what it was going to cost. That's why it's important to be tracking your spending to see, are you on target, or do you need to make adjustments? Did you underestimate what it's costing, or perhaps you overestimated? In either way, you want to make adjustments. But you also then need to review and revise your plan as needed over time if your circumstances change. For example, as you go from 1 year in law school to the next, there could be adjustments that you need to make, because being a second or a third year student has a different sort of cost perspective than that as a first year. Secondly, what if there's been a change in your own circumstances? Maybe you have gotten married. Maybe you've had a child. Maybe you've gotten unmarried. Maybe there's something else that's changed about how you need to spend money. So again, you want to be reviewing and revising your plan periodically, particularly if your circumstances have changed, to see what adjustments are needed. Now, the question becomes, can you follow that plan, that budget you've created, your spending plan? Well, here's where I'd suggest you try something that I call the big chill. It's where you put all of your plastic on ice for the weekend, so that you can see if you can live within your means for the weekend. So how does it work? Well, on Thursday night, try this experiment. Calculate what you can afford to spend from Friday night until Monday morning. Then withdraw that amount of cash out of your checking account. Then put all your plastic, your credit cards, your ATM card, your debit card, in a metal bowl. Then fill the bowl with water and freeze it. That's why I call it the big chill. And keep it frozen all weekend. The idea is you want those plastic cards to be out of the way so that you can't easily use them if you were wanting to. Then enjoy the weekend. Now, during the weekend, As you're spending money, now you're only using cash. So it allows you to be much more aware of and more mindful of the trade-off between spending the money or saving it for something else later in the weekend. Now, what happens if you run out of money? What if before the weekend is over, you've run out of cash? Well, then you either have to stop spending money and do only free things. Well, that would suggest that you need to just focus on studying and sleeping. Or you could borrow money from your friends, probably not a good idea. Or you could go back to where that metal bowl is stored, take it out of the freezer, thaw it out under hot running water, and take the plastic cards and go get some more money. But if you do that, now you've exceeded your spending plan for the weekend. You've exceeded what you thought your budget was for just those 2 days. And if you can't stick to a budget for 2 days, then what makes you think you're going to stick to that plan for a week, a month, or a year? And if you don't stick to your plan, if you're spending more than you planned, then it likely means you're going to have to borrow more than you planned. And that assumes you can even borrow more. If you're already borrowing the maximum amount possible, then it means that you're likely now also using credit cards to help cover your needs. And that's going to get you into financial trouble pretty quickly. Because credit cards essentially put you into financial quicksand, and you really want to avoid that at all possible. Because whenever you exceed your spending plan, you probably are now relying more heavily on credit, particularly your credit cards. And that increases your long-term debt. It increases the cost of that debt. It risks your future ability to borrow money, perhaps to buy a new home. It reduces the chances of achieving your financial goals in the future. And it loses financial flexibility. It jeopardizes your financial opportunities down the road. And you want to be very careful about doing those things, because all of those result in problems for you. This is not going to lead to financial success if these things are happening to you. So let's have a few final comments before we bring this module or this tutorial to a close. Remember, whenever you're borrowing money, and particularly if you're borrowing loans to be here at the law school, and over 90% of all law students across the country have to borrow money to go to law school. So if you're borrowing money to be here, you're certainly not alone. But in doing so, remember, you're using or you're spending your future income. You're obligating your future income in part to the repayment of this debt. And you don't want to spend any more of that income than you have to. Because once you are out of school and you're working, you're going to have a lot of other things you want to spend that money on. But remember that the first thing you're going to have to focus on each month is, at a minimum, paying off your debts. And you're going to have your living expenses. But you're also going to want to start saving and investing for the future, something that you're not going to be looking at and doing while you're in law school. So in fact, you're actually falling a bit behind when it comes to that particular bucket. And then there's also philanthropy, to the extent you want to be making charitable contributions to other organizations. So you're going to have lots of uses for that future income. And you want to make sure that the past bucket, the debts you've incurred to be in law school, don't jeopardize your ability to make the kinds of choices and allocations to the present, the future, and philanthropy that you otherwise would have been able to do had you been more thrifty in law school. And you want to have a smart strategy. And there's some keys to success for having a smart strategy. First of all, stay focused on your goals. Avoid unnecessary distractions. Remember, your reason for being here in law school is to get the law degree so that you then ultimately can do the work you want to do. And in reality, you won't actually achieve your ultimate goal until you've actually gotten that first paycheck doing whatever it is you're planning to do with this degree. So you want to make sure that to the extent money is an issue, it's not distracting you from achieving that goal. And being smart about your spending and trying to make sure you're not spending more than you need to will allow you to have greater success and less stress about money. Take control of your spending so that you're borrowing only what you need. If you're spending more, you're likely borrowing more, either through student loans or from other forms of credit like your credit cards, and that's not going to be a strategy for success. And to the extent you're borrowing loans, make sure you're managing them responsibly. And we have a whole series of tutorials in the Loan Repayment Strategy series on how to manage the repayment of your student loans. So I encourage you to check out all of those modules in the Loan Repayment Strategy series to get more information about that. Now, we talked about the idea that you want to save on spending. And that's really important because that's one way to reduce your borrowing. But you also can reduce your borrowing in other ways. For example, by applying for additional scholarship funding through private organizations, by making sure to the extent you're spending money, you're very mindful of how quickly you're spending the money, and using cash rather than using your credit or debit cards, the plastic in your wallet or billfold, is a good way to make sure you're not going through the cash too fast. And think about other ways you might be able to reduce your borrowing. Talk to your peers to see, have they come up with any ideas? And remember, use credit cards for convenience. You likely have credit cards. You need to have a credit card or two so that you can demonstrate to the credit world that you know how to use credit cards, because that will help you to build your credit score. But you always want to make sure that you're not using your credit cards for credit. In other words, when you use a credit card, make sure that when the bill comes each month, that you pay the full amount owed, not just the minimum payment. Because in that way, you're really using that credit card like a debit card. You're just using it for convenience. You're not really using it as a way of borrowing money. And that way, it's not cost you anything. But if you're not paying the bill in full each month when it's due, then you're using it as a form of credit. And that's going to build to your debt, and that's going to create problems for you. Using credit cards is not a strategy for success if you're not paying the bill in full every month. And you do have opportunities to learn more about how to make good money management decisions. So I'd encourage you to check out all the money management modules, and in particular the one on how to build your budget. But also check out the loan repayment strategies modules to help you better understand how the repayment of the loans you have, particularly if you have federal student loans, which hopefully you do, can be a reasonable approach to how you manage your finances in the future. And for more information in general about money and money management, when it comes to your student loans, check out studentaid.gov and studentloans.gov. When it comes to issues of personal finance, check out bankrate.com, kiplinger.com, money.cnn.com. For budgeting, check out mint.com. On information about taxes, check out irs.gov. And to the extent you're thinking about the future and you're worried about, when and how are you going to start planning for retirement, saving to buy a house and so forth, things that you're not really focused on in law school, but that you need to be aware of once you start working. You may want to check out letsmakeaplan.org, the official website of the organization that certifies financial planners, because they have a lot of good, useful information for consumers about financial planning. And remember, you want to get on target financially. You want to make good choices, and that requires that you save on your spending, because that will lead to a strategy that will lead to greater success financially while you're here in the law school. So I hope this information has been helpful to you. Good luck while you're here at the law school at the University of San Francisco.